In this tutorial series, we'll be going through MetaSounds node by node for the Unreal Engine, learning how to go from beginner to complicated in game-driven sounds and procedurally generated music.
For today's tutorial, what we're going to do is listen to an output from a MetaSound, which can be all sorts of different kinds of things, including values, audio, or triggers. We're going to do triggers as the example, but it flows the same for everything. So I've got some things pre-set up that are outside of the scope of the tutorial, but are here to be helpful for you seeing what's going on. So I've got a dynamic material instance set up. So that's essentially just a material that I can change the color on as I wish. And I've done that just so we can kind of easily do something to affect the world in a practical example. Also, in previous tutorials, I've built this MetaSound that kind of changes pitch on a tone. Kind of randomly selects notes on a scale and plays them to a beat. So with that tutorial, again, all of this generation node by node is covered in other tutorials. What we're going to do is create an output for that. So in your MetaSound, in the top left-hand corner, you'll see a plus sign next to the outputs. That lets you add an output. You can see here it's automatically adding a float output. We're going to change this to, we're going to call this T beat. Trigger beat is what essentially I'm thinking by the naming. And when I select this, I'm going to go down below in the details, and I'm going to change it from a float to a trigger. A trigger is essentially, think of it like an event execution. Now with the output created, what I can do is I can listen to this trigger repeat beat, which everything flows off of. And essentially I can do something outside of the MetaSound also by the same trigger. So I'm going to drag this output here, and I'm just going to drag this into the output. Now our new output is essentially going to inform anything that asks about this output, whether it's a value change or a beat execution, whatever. It's going to inform the output. So that is done. Now let's go to my actor. So I created a simple actor. It's just a cube with a dynamic material instance. I've called it demo cube. And you can see here, all I do is create the dynamic material instance. If you don't know what that is, it's just an easy way to, at runtime, change a parameter of a material. And I've created this flip-flop where every time I call this, it will flop between green and pink. So I'm going to do something else on begin play. I'm going to spawn our MetaSound. And it's helpful if you do this kind of in the same place. It doesn't necessarily have to be on this actor, but it's easier to move information around when you have access to the MetaSound directly. We're going to spawn a sound 2D, and I always use spawn sound for this, for MetaSounds. And we're going to do our new MetaSound. And I'm going to go ahead and promote this to a variable. And I'm going to call this MetaSound for clarity on the tutorial. And what we can do, we can even build a sequence here. That way, creating this dynamic material instance and creating the MetaSound can be separate. So now that I'm spawning the MetaSound on a begin play, I should be able to hear the sound when I play it in the editor. And that's great. So now, the next step, which is actually fairly simple once you understand what you're doing, I'm going to go get this MetaSound output subsystem, which you can find by just typing MetaSound output subsystem, and you'll see it right there in world subsystems. So we're going to drag off of this, and we're going to watch output. And the output we're going to watch is called T-beat. I always like to double check because it's essentially tag matching that I didn't do a typo. So we're going to go back to our new MetaSound and make sure T-beat with all lowercase after the T. So here we go. I've got the same thing. It's a common place it gets messed up. And then I'm going to make sure that the audio component it's worried about is this one right here. So now this is a delegate. I'm going to add a custom event, and I'm going to call this beat listen. And this should execute every single time that we want to do something on the beat. So I'm going to go ahead and type in my toggle color. And now we should be able to watch it change, cut back and forth in colors on the beat. And that is driven by the metasound. So that's how to listen to an output. We're going to talk about one more thing because floats are a little different. We're going to go to our outputs again. We're going to add another output. We're going to add just a standard float, and we're just going to call this audio F for audio float. And we're just going to listen to the audio as a float. So essentially, an audio is a waveform, just goes up and down. That up and down value is essentially just going up and down between 1 and -1. You can see right here. And we can listen to that audio value as well. And this is another kind of way to drive something from your metasound. For this one, it's going to be less exciting, but we're going to do the same kind of thing here. We're going to watch the output again. And again, I'm setting all this up on begin play, so that way it's just ready to go. And it's going to be the same connections. But for this time, we're going to need to type in audio F because we're listening to a different output. We're going to do a new thing where we type in audio float, listen, whatever you want to name it. And this time we're going to type float and type get float. So what this is essentially going to do is to take the output and to change it into something that the blueprint can now use, which is the float itself. So the reason I typed get float instead of something else is because, as we talked about, we know this is a float. So there's a little bit of nudge, wink, wink communication going on where the developer is the one that Shanghai's the communication. So you are saying that it has to be this tag. It's going to run on the beat. And this is essentially like a rep notify. It will just change every single time. It'll run this execution every single time something changes. So what we can do is we can print the string and we can print this value as a string so we can just see it run across the page. And what I'm going to do is actually type in the key as float. So that way it won't run down the page. We'll just constantly see it change. And now when I hit play, you can see it run through a large variety of numbers until returning to 0, which is exactly what it should be doing if it's listening to the audio and the audio has a beat and then it has nothing. It has a little doot and then nothing. And so we can see the doots in number form and we can manipulate those numbers. It's now a float. We can do something with in blueprints. Let your imagination run wild.
This tutorial series is brought to you by my MetaSound Starter Pack. If you're looking for more complicated examples on how to utilize procedurally generated music and game-driven sounds inside of your projects, you might want to give it a look. More details in the description below. This is Space Dodo, where we talk about games and game development.